Welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable. The acceleration of change in the auto industry is happening, and it's difficult to predict exactly what changes will occur in 2023. However, it is clear that the pace of change is accelerating. With us today are an all-star panel, including Steve Greenfield of Automotive Ventures and the author of The Future of Automotive Retail, Brian Kramer of Cars.com and AccuTrade, Ed Roberts of Bozard Ford Lincoln, and Steve Westner of Blue Ocean's Global Consulting. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Fixed Ops Roundtable.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
If it's all right, Steve Greenfield, I'll kind of start things off with you today. Steve, can you paint a picture of how you think our retail auto industry will change over the next 5 years? And are there some things that you feel we're not fully understanding or appreciating by our industry just yet?
Well, Ted, first, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be back, especially with this team on the calls today. It's a bit of a loaded question because I just wrote a book about it. It would take a long time, but glancing across the highlights, I think what you said resonates with me. I think we're going to see more change in the next 5 to 10 years than this industry has seen in the last 100. And I think it's across, redefining the way that we sell cars, that we service vehicles, and even the experience the consumer has during the lifetime of ownership of the vehicles. I think that the big things that come to mind right now that we're seeing play out in real time, one is sort of the redefinition of the relationship between the manufacturer and the dealer, which is accelerating at a greater pace outside of the US, but definitely the manufacturers are probing the boundaries of how much they can flex that relationship with their franchise dealers. Number 2 and 3, I would say, are related, both having to do with the connected car. One, over-the-air updates is going to start to disrupt some of the existing service, warranty, and recall work, where we're going to be able to push software updates to consumers' vehicles, and they're going to be able to avoid coming into the dealership entirely. And then related to that, via the connected car, we're starting to see in the news OEMs attempting to unbundle vehicle features and turn them into monthly subscription products. And there's been a lot of pushback so far, but I think you've only seen the edge of the iceberg, so to speak. And more OEMs are envisioning a future where they're going to generate billions and billions of dollars of high margin software subscription revenue by taking features that are already built into the car and allowing the consumer to either pay up front or pay by the month.
Steve Greenfield, I know you are talking about this, as are everybody on the panel. Do you think that the retail dealership side is aware of all that's happening in terms of what you just said, the over-the-air update subscription potential and the revenue model that is coming, if not here already?
Well, it's a good question. I think there are a number of dealers out there that are aware of this and are staying abreast of it. I'm encouraged cycle, specifically the negotiations that are going on right now between dealer councils and their OEMs around how these new revenues will be shared back to the dealer. Because you can envision a future, Ted, you buy a vehicle, 6 months later, you elect to unlock a feature on that vehicle and start paying, say, $100 a month for that feature. The selling dealer may not even be aware that Ted unlocked that feature, never mind how much revenue you're paying. So the dealers could be stranded and left in the dark and not participate in these revenue streams unless these revenue shares are pre-negotiated now. And I know behind the scenes, a lot of these conversations are taking place.
Brian Kramer, your thoughts on the same question, change over the next 5 or so years?
Well, obviously, I agree with Steve on everything that he said. I think that a lot of what he said is happening right now. I just don't know that everybody's completely aware of it. There's vehicles that are being taken in on trade that have some of those subscriptions unlocked, and not everybody's as familiar with those vehicles as they should be. The regulations aren't in place in order to disclose on a buyer's guide what those subscriptions are and when they run out. I think West Virginia is ahead of everybody in the country when it comes to that. And I know that Mike Stanton from NADA has that at the top of his list on his guidelines. I think it's exciting, disruptive at the same time. It's, the way that I see it is it's the fourth screen of your tech stack. So you've got your monitor and you've got, all, your DMS and your CRM and your service write-up tool and your appointment scheduler, your BDC stuff. But the car is actually, when it pulls up, from what I've seen, pulling the layers back, it's just a matter of connecting everything. The car is actually, I just scheduled an appointment for my daughter's Toyota, And when I went through it, it had already had the mileage in there from connected car. And that's happening today. So all I had to do was just validate what the mileage is. And the more that we can integrate things like that, and it can personalize the experience to me, that where it knows what the trim level is. I don't have to memorize what the first 11 digits of the VIN are, so that it already knows what kind of tires are on there. So it can ping it the night before to have the tires ready in stock, so I don't have to come back the next day. I think that those efficiencies, as long as we unlock this in the right way, are going to be amazing for the consumer experience.
Ed Roberts, same question. Next 5 years, and as well as what you're seeing today.
There's tons of opportunity out there for us. I agree with what both the guys are saying so far. The over-the-air updates, a lot of dealers are crying because and I am a dealer, but a lot of dealers are crying because there's a loss of revenue stream. Well, let's face it, over the last several decades, we haven't done a good job of focusing on service. Now that there's an element to take a little bit of service away, we want to say, hey, you can't do that. But there's ways for that to tie together, because I'm a fan of over-the-air updates, but there's several different ways we can do that. One, we don't want to necessarily do a safety update over the air, because if it doesn't get to complete, that's probably not the best thing for it to be out there. If it gets interrupted for whatever reason, Wi-Fi, vehicle has to go into use or whatever else. So that probably shouldn't be. But also it needs to tie in, as Brian was talking about with connected vehicle data, it needs to tie in to where if there's an issue, and it can tie into our BDC and various different elements where we can look and say, okay, well, there's an update for that. Let me send this update to your vehicle, and I'll check with you tomorrow. And if it's still doing the same thing, then we'll get you in. But I don't want to bring in if I don't need to. And so there's opportunities for us to be proactive on doing some of those repairs, as well as prepare for predictive diagnosis as stuff starts to fail, where we can have parts available, like Brian said, and we have the right parts available, so that it's not a come in, let's check it out, let's order it, send you back out, then bring you back to get it done. Everything's here and waiting for you, so we can streamline it.
Ed, I'm taking notes, and I got a new phrase from you just now: predictive diagnosis. That may become a big phrase. Ed, do you believe that your peers, going back to what Steve Greenfield and Brian were saying, in terms of the potential revenue stream that's coming from some of these software updates, are your peers aware of everything that's at stake, right now in early 2023?
I wouldn't say we're aware of everything that's at stake, but there is a lot of noise out there, because customers feel like, if I'm paying for it to buy the vehicle, why do I got to pay for it to work? And those are some of the obstacles that we got to overcome going forward. But it's features that we can add to it, because we can send an software update to a vehicle for an option that it was never built with, but with software we can bring to it, because different things come out and whatever else. So we can add features to it later on through the same things. I'm a proponent. I like technology. I embrace technology, and I look forward to those elements hitting.
Steve Westner, I give you credit for the foresight of putting this panel together. Your thoughts on the next 5 years and what's coming?
Well, I think there's a number of changes going to happen, and the three guys ahead of me, obviously very knowledgeable, capable, and hit a lot of the high points. The one thing that I notice most is when you take a look at the biggest change that's coming, the biggest change is software. At the end of the day, it's software and what it can do in a car and what it turns your car into. And the major problem with that is, I see at both the dealership level and the OEM level, is the class of cultures. Because if you look at an automotive culture and then you look at a tech software culture, those two things, at least in the past, have been almost incompatible. And you're now going to have to find a way not only to blend them, but to make them work really, really well. Because with software, like everything else, you have an advantage when you start. Very quickly it gets copied, and you have to continue to build that momentum. And to do that smoothly and to handle it across your distribution chain and to handle it across your dealer organization, I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge. I know it will be inside the OEMs. So that's what I would say would be the biggest challenge. But at the same time, the excitement and opportunity of it is really cool, because you're going to turn your car into something that people today have no idea about. And it's not going to be just a glorified cell phone. It's going to be far more than that. And I think that's where the excitement comes in.
I like that excitement and opportunity. Steve Westner, while I have you, we haven't mentioned EVs yet. What bottlenecks, if any, do you see hampering EV adoption over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think first and foremost, the obvious one is infrastructure. If you look across a country the size of the United States, getting that infrastructure in place to allow long distance trips to happen, I think is going to be key. When you take a look at Europe, for example, they have much smaller countries, much smaller geography, and far more charging stations. And I was over there just recently, and you see people pull up with their EVs, plug them in just like nothing. It's not a big deal. I think once we get past that initial piece, the next bottleneck, and I think a big bottleneck, is going to be sort of this vertical integration that the OEMs have to go through to get control of the chemicals and the elements that go into making these batteries. And I think the guys, the OEMs that tie those things up early and get out in front of that will be the ones that'll be in a stronger position in the future. But I would say those would be the two bottlenecks that I would see off the top. I'm sure there are others.
Steve Greenfield, what are you aware of in terms of EVs and bottlenecks? Again, that has not until now been part of the discussion we're having.
Yeah, I think Steve nailed it. The only thing I would have to add to him is really like this notion of the circular economy, right? Like, what are we going to do with these vehicles at end of life? Because even if we extend the warranty to 8 years on the battery or whatever it is, you know, at the end of that, if the battery is only functioning at 70 or 80% of its capacity, which could be reasonably be the percentage, then it may be more valuable to reclaim that battery and use it for some other purpose, you know, to take power from a solar array or use it in a household purpose or in a commercial purpose as a backup battery. And, you know, what are we going to do with these batteries at end of life? There are, you know, multi-billion-dollar valuation companies now that will pull apart the batteries and try to reconstitute those raw inputs back into the top of the supply chain, which will give us more energy independence from places like China, et cetera. But I think that what we don't want to happen is these batteries just get thrown in a landfill, obviously, and more work needs to be done to make sure that we have a specific plan at end of life.
Brian Kramer, you opened a lot of eyes with a LinkedIn post just after the hurricane last fall when you made the point, and I think there were hundreds, thousands of people commenting on your post about, you know, maybe the infrastructure is not quite there on the EV side. And you made us all think, Brian. Your thoughts on possible bottlenecks?
Well, I know, I researched obviously when that happened, and I found out that some number of years ago, I think it was prior to Irma, that Florida had a regulation that you have to have a backup generator at a gas station in order to keep all the emergency vehicles running. And that contingency isn't in place for other things. I guess you could plug a car into that theoretically, but there was, it's a lot of questions that I don't think a lot of people have thought about. Like I was using my Ford Bronco Wi-Fi, and that was the only Wi-Fi that was working in Southwest Florida. I remember I was in the parking lot of my hotel, and that was the only reason I was able to post those things, because the infrastructure was completely shut down for emergency purposes. The interesting thing is some people I know that had EVs had an extended range downloaded to them where it was able to use a higher percentage for them to evacuate, which is so who knows how many unsaid things there are like that. But I'll add this final piece. So I'm in the process of buying just a fun vehicle, an EV, Vanderhall Brawley. And as it's getting nearer to the delivery date, I'm now having to come to the realization of the learning curve that goes into, okay, how am I going to operate this every single day? And the education, I don't think exists out there in the industry right now. What do you do if my local dealer there, I said, well, can you guys install a charging station in my house? Well, no, but we can find an electrician. So that whole part is very disjointed. And I think that unlike a car dealership where you're selling prepaid maintenance and you're selling all these things, we're talking about, what's that do to a fixed operations with EVs? Well, the tire sales go up because it's more weight and all the other things that we've been talking about. But I don't think that we're talking about the in-home maintenance of these EVs, if you have a solar panel powering that, or I almost think that car dealerships have to become, I know that Ed's already a mobile service dealer, but that mobile service dealer could also be an electrician that's installing these things, maintaining them every 12 months, like a generator, I think there's a whole lot of other business opportunities that don't currently exist that will morph out of this.
Ed, you're in Florida with a big dealership. You're doing a lot of EV business. I think Florida, I believe last time I checked, was second in the country. And you're in a high volume dealership as well. And a big part of what you do, and you've come up through fixed operations, your thoughts on potential EV bottlenecks?
Well, Brian he's hit the nail on the head. We got to help our customers with their at-home infrastructure. The infrastructure isn't out there to what it needs to be yet. And I'll circle back to that in just a minute. But the at-home infrastructure, if a customer leaves their home every day with a full charge, their dependency on the public infrastructure is much less. And Tesla's got the best infrastructure out there. We all know that. That's one brand and only works on that brand. The other infrastructure has got to go across all brands. And so the likeliness of those things being available when we need them is a lot less likely. So we got to be less dependent on the public infrastructure. Then as we go into that, and Rivian's got them, GM's going to release a Silverado here soon. Ford has its Lightning. As we bring more and more trucks into the marketplace that are EV, people tow things with their truck. And now we're going to block up more than one charge station while we're charging our vehicle because we got a trailer attached to it because nobody's going to want to disconnect it. So we got to create an infrastructure with longer parking spots and whatever else. And we'll see that at some of the truck stops, but we got to do that in the public as well. We got to be able to address those things. But more than anything, the big bottleneck is helping and having dealers that can help the customer with their at-home infrastructure.
Love it. Steve Greenfield, do you want to comment on that?
No, I think I'd characterize it very, very well. It's one thing theoretically to say we're going to have much more chargers out there, many more chargers out there. But I mean, the actual practicality of this one-to-one mapping of parking spots and stuff is you hear horror stories all the time that chargers that are on my app either aren't available because there's a back of vehicles or aren't working that particular day. So a lot of these logistic challenges still need to get worked out.
And the speed of charging, I think, is critical too, because you can fill your gas tank up in a few minutes. You can't recharge your electric car in a few minutes. So until that speed comes along, I think that'll be a big factor too.
Ed, going back to the retail side on the speed, of the charge, I know there are a lot of requirements on the OEM side, in terms of the charge. You have to deliver the vehicle back to the customer. Talk to us about that and that rapid charging and the state of that.
There's a lot of noise, negative noise, because of what Ford's requiring the Ford dealers to do. I'm in 100% support of it because I know the customer that I'm selling to is most likely a first-time EV buyer, and they don't have that home infrastructure. So I can't deliver that vehicle with a 40% charge. And people have waited years. I waited 17 months to get my Lightning. We've waited forever to come get our vehicle. I get an email from the manufacturer when the dealer gets the vehicle. If the dealer needs it for a day and a half to charge it because they only have a 40 amp charger, then that's going to bottleneck at the store as well. So we at the dealer need to be able to charge these things with superchargers so that we can deliver these vehicles with 100% charge, and then also be the destination when they're in the area for whatever reason, because ultimately we want to be able to drive those customers back here. And when they come in for service, we want to be able to deliver it back to them with a full charge, and reasons to why buy here, reasons to why service here. Some of those things will still tie together. So I'm a fan of the superchargers. The infrastructure is a big old giant number, but that's average across the board, across the nation. Some places going to be a little cheaper, whatever else, but we need that infrastructure to be there.
And Brian, I got to come back to you on that, because until recently, you, a very big, one of the largest Toyota retailers in the nation, you've led that and built that. What do you see on the rapid side and the requirements there?
Well, I think that there's a lot of education that has to occur, because there's a lot of people that have range anxiety, and they also don't know that they should take it down to 30-40% before they charge it back up again. There's a lot of people that are taking it 20% charging it. And if you're charging it on a fast charger, it's, putting big holes in that graphene mesh battery that is going to, very quickly deteriorate the life expectancy of the battery, which obviously are not cheap. So like when you're servicing it or putting an evaluation on it, to be able to diagnose that and be able to educate somebody that it's okay if they don't take it to 100% every single night, that they have to take down to a certain point in order to maintain the life of it. I don't know that everyone is equipped to be able to educate consumers at time of delivery effectively on that as of today.
Steve Greenfield, a lot of these conversations all come back to software. And I want to advance the conversation to that software topic. Steve, what would you say? Is that end state software ultimately going to be the differentiator and the difference maker here in the car business?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing the manufacturers wrestle with this right now. I mean, the big tech players like Google and Apple want to own the dash and want everything to be very phone centric and port over the phone experience onto the dash. Whereas the legacy OEMs are fighting this. Some have embraced, CarPlay and Google Android, but many are fighting it. And as we all know, I mean, the old legacy navigation systems on vehicles, for the most part, can't live up to the innovation that takes place on the phone device. So I think we're seeing this play out. We're seeing in the news recently, automakers talking about the software-defined vehicle, how important this is going to be, not the least of which is the in-cabin experience. But we've also today talked about subscription products to the unbundling of vehicle features. We've talked about over-the-air updates. Software is going to become increasingly important as a point of differentiation for the legacy manufacturers. I'm concerned that many of these legacy manufacturers can't jump that chasm. And despite the fact that a few have announced that they're going to spend literally tens of billions of dollars around building out software competency, I think it's going to be very, very challenging. Remember, this is the same time that these legacy manufacturers are retooling their factories to make the move from ICE vehicles, internal combustion, to EVs. They're also in parallel undertaking huge initiatives to become more software defined. And I think it's going to break the backs of some of the legacy OEMs. I think some of them either aren't going to make it, or at least, a few years from now, going to retreat from even attempting the software. And they're going to have to circle back and outsource it to some of these big tech giants.
Brian, let me come over to you. That same question on software, and then kind of dovetailing on what Steve just said. Will the industry become better or worse for those legacy OEMs over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think they're going to fall into two different buckets. I'm currently working with many of them right now, and the things that they're working on are mind-blowing in terms of what they're doing to personalize the experience, to control the experience, and to make it more streamlined and make it more of a SaaS model that just enhances the human experience. I think that a big misconception is that everybody thinks that technology software is going to replace people with robots. And I don't think that I think it's actually the opposite of that. I think it enables amazing experiences. Artificial intelligence, which I think is going to be the biggest of all of these different things with Web3, that's going to be the biggest. And it's already, you see it with ChatGPT and what's happening with it. I think that what is going to happen is all the menial redundant tasks can be automated, and, specifically around check-in, ordering parts, all of those things, to be able to connect and bring the humanity back into this business so that everybody's freed up and they're locked behind a computer responding to thousands of emails and also task-based. I think it'd go back to a human interaction, very similar to the Apple Store and what they did going, from, remember the old gateway stores, to a real true experience.
Ed, we're on the cusp of a lot of things happening. Your thoughts on the software and then on the legacy OEMs? And you're muted.
Sorry about that. Software enhances us all if we use it properly. Let's go to the legacy OEMs. I'm not so concerned with the OEMs adapting and being able to be there, because they can create partnerships and they can do various different things. I'm more concerned at the dealer level. Some dealers are going to embrace it, and some dealers are not. And so it's more the legacy dealers that I'm having the concern with, of the widespread of what we're going to do over the next 10 years as we adopt to EV and the changes that come.
Makes a lot of sense. Steve Westner?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Ed. I think when I look at it, the OEMs, yes, I believe some of them will fail, but they all have really deep pockets. And as one vice president once said to me, we have a lot of money, we get a lot of at-bats. They have a lot of at-bats to try this thing. For most dealerships, they don't have a lot of at-bats. And I think the challenge for them, as I said, is being more comfortable with technology. And it isn't that it's going to replace you. It's that you, as an employee, have to be very comfortable with having technology as a partner in what you do. And the technology brings, like Brian just said, do a lot of the busy work stuff. Let the tech take care of that. And then you concentrate on the people stuff, the humanity side of it, where you're connecting with the customer, you're having a meaningful discussion and experience with them. I think that's far more important. When you go into a store now, especially in the service drive, they're so busy looking at their iPad or looking at their screen, trying to write everything down. Half the time you don't think they're talking to you because they're looking at the screen most of the time. And I think if you can have that automated, and you can have a real conversation with somebody, I think that connection is going to be far more significant for the dealer's future success than the software. The software, that's supposed to take care of the busy work, in my opinion.
Great observation. Gentlemen, fascinating discussion. Last question for today. I'll start with Steve Greenfield. I'll come over to Brian, then Ed and Steve Westner. I'll let you bring it home. Steve Greenfield, what fundamental changes do you think that dealers need to make in their business model to be successful over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I'll say three things that I would recommend to dealers that are listening in. So one would be, just intuitively, be a student of the industry. Things are changing so quickly. You got to stay up on the news cycle right now because there are things that are evolving very quickly that are going to impact your business. Number two would be very involved and stay attuned to NADA, your state association, as well as your dealer council for your franchises. Because right now things are getting defined around the agency model, the way that OEMs and their relationship with the franchisees are playing out, as well as I said earlier, these negotiations that are going on currently between the dealer council and the OEMs around how that revenue on subscription services will be shared are very, very important decisions. And we'll look back to this era and say some of these decisions that were made have huge financial implications into the future. And then number three is, I think that it's very important that dealers stay very abreast of cutting edge technologies. And it's always hard to cut through the clutter, but I'll use Brian as an example. I mean, you look at AccuTrade, it's a groundbreaking technology for those dealers that embrace it properly and can hugely deliver incremental profit and change the processes of the store. So I think that staying abreast of new technologies that can really help in day-to-day operations is vitally important as well.
I love it. Brian, same question for you. Fundamental changes that dealers need to make to their business model in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think that one of the main things, once you get the actual technologies down, and I think that the technology is going to keep on changing. So ultimately, not to steal Ed's thunder, but it comes back to culture. And if you have a culture that's agile and nimble, it doesn't matter what changes come with the technology. Like Steve was just saying, the appraisal business hadn't changed in a long, long time. The leasing business in 0203 used to be a very complicated thing. And then Lease Link, Lease Profit, Market Scan came out, and it was just a couple of clicks. And then the skill set changed for that particular position. And I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, every single position will be redefined like that in the dealership, all the way up. And it's going to come down to leadership. It's going to come down to mentorship. It's going to come down to having a leadership pipeline that's clearly defined, just like the best dealers do for technicians, for every position in the dealership, because people want to be empowered. This next generation, these millennials and these Gen Z, they want to be empowered. They want to be enabled. They want to be trusted. And the skill set that got all of us to where we're at are not going to be the skill set for the next generation. You're going to have culture training. And some of the best OEMs are already doing that. Leadership training. You can't just be task-based and just manage this. And I'm one-dimensional and I'm not going to be growing, developing, leading others. I think that's the biggest transformation. When the technology takes care of the jobs itself, the only thing that's left is leadership, development, coaching, and culture.
Wow, Brian, well said. Ed, I think this question was designed for you.
Well, we could tie it because I'm a fixed guy or whatever else, but let's fast forward 10 years, and I think our customers are going to be less dependent on brand or less focused on brand, and they're going to be focused on what the vehicle can do. And today there's different things that sets them apart or whatever else. So it's going to evolve to what's the difference with experience? What's the ownership experience like? And that's where Fix can really affect going forward with mobile service, with pickup and delivery, with making it convenient for a customer to own your brand vehicle. The inconvenient ones, we're not going to be so brand loyal. So think about the difference between why you shop at Walmart and why you shop at Target. You can both get the same product, but one's going to give you a different experience. And then there's Amazon that come along with that. So it's experience that I think is going to set it apart. As Brian said earlier, there with culture is what drives it.
Thank you, Ed. Steve Westner, I'll give you the last word for today.
Yeah, I would say if you listen to the things that the three guys have just said, the complexity of this task is beyond one person. So it can't just be the dealer deciding this. You really need to take the time to put the right leadership team together in the dealership today to be prepared for these things so that you have somebody looking at this and somebody looking at the industry and somebody looking at different parts. But having that coordination between your leadership team and having the right people on that team, I think will give you a huge leg up if you can do it now. That I guess ties in with what the other three guys said, because the complexity of this, trust me, if the dealer keeps it all to himself and tries to do the one-man show, I mean, it's just going to explode. So have a good, strong leadership team and trust them to work together, and you'll go far.
There it is, everybody. Some of the best minds in the business. I want to thank Steve Greenfield. I want to thank Brian Kramer, Ed Roberts, and Steve Westner for being here today. Powerful conversation, gentlemen. Amazing points, and one of the best panels I've seen here at the Roundtable. I want to thank them all. The acceleration of change in the auto industry panel here today at the Fixed Ops Roundtable.